Hey everyone, Doug here with DNH. Today we're looking at a new hybrid still/cinema camera. This is Sigma's newest entry, the CinemaFpL. It's a follow-up to their previous FP camera, and though it may look similar, it sports a brand new full-frame 61 megapixel sensor, which is a huge increase over the previous model's 24 megapixels. What's also new, and very upfront, is this removable EVF, turning the FPL into a powerful stills camera that now features phase detection autofocus. Sounds promising, right? If you're a hybrid shooter who wants a capable video and stills camera, the FPL adds a lot to get the job done. Cinematographers will appreciate not just the recording options here, but the cinema-centric features such as the director's viewfinder mode, while those who need to make large prints can make the most of the 61 megapixel sensor. Shooters will also benefit from new color modes, silent shooting, and of course, an even larger L-mount lens catalog than before. There's a lot to discuss here, so let's begin. So on the outside, the FPL is almost completely identical to the original FP, so much so that, in fact, all accessories that fit the FP will also fit the FPL, like this cage, as the dimensions and the ports are exactly the same. At the heart of the FPL, though, is its massive full-frame 61 megapixel BSI CMOS sensor, which itself brings lots to the table. Number one, and perhaps the biggest functional addition to the FPL, is the sensor's on-chip phase detect autofocus, which completely changes how you can use the camera. The AF system is now a hybrid phase detect and contrast detect design, working both in stills and in video, though we'll get back to this in a bit. By the way, the sensor hits a maximum ISO of 25,600, which I know may not sound like the highest option, but it is very clean thanks to a dual base ISO arrangement, so you shouldn't find yourself struggling in low light. This is indeed also Sigma's second Bayer sensor design after the original FP, so you won't see the same color rendering that you would see with one of their earlier Foveon sensor designs, but the much higher resolution should provide something closer to the sharpness and detail levels seen in a Foveon sensor, along of course with the benefits of low light sensitivity and dynamic range that we've come to see in traditional Bayer designs. Of course, the other notable addition here is the removable EVF. It's a gorgeous 3.68 million dot OLED display that can attach to the camera via the left side connectors and features a 90-degree tilt mechanism. The FP is a modular design by nature, so the nice thing is the EVF doesn't always have to be used. If you're shooting video and you'd rather rig the camera from top to bottom to use an external monitor, you absolutely can. But I think photographers in particular will be thrilled to have an EVF here. Now get this, the EVF will actually be compatible with the original FP as well with a future firmware update. Filmmakers will appreciate the addition of true 24 FPS recording, meaning actual 24, not 23.976. It's a small but necessary change if you want to add the FPL to your cinematography kit. Otherwise, like Sigma's original offering, you're looking at a lot of the same key features of the FP. Recording options are diverse, including a unique 8-bit CinemaDNG format that can be recorded internally, along with both intra and long GOP H.264 options. It allows the same 12-bit external CinemaDNG recording via USB-C, which we're using for some in this video, and also allows for ProRes RAW and Blackmagic RAW output via HDMI. Like the FP, it also has dual base ISO, as I mentioned before, along with timecode input, SDXC recording, and USB-C output. The FPL is still an electronic shutter-only camera, which does mean it's not ideal for heavy flash photographer users, but it's inherently silent and contributes to the camera's small size. As a cinema camera, the FPL brings not only stunning, crisp 4K video, but its modular design and assist functions let it excel in a cinematography setting. As far as specs are concerned though, we're looking at UHD 4K video up to 30 FPS and 1080p video up to 120 FPS. The 61 megapixel sensor really pays off here with incredibly sharp downsampling and an optical low-pass filter that mitigates moire. Internally, video can be recorded to 8-bit CinemaDNG, which does give you a pristine uncompressed image, but the limited bit depth does mean you might want to consider the compressed H.264 options when you record internally. You can record to either all intra or GOP modes written to the MOV container, providing 8-bit 420 color. Now, for reference, you can record about an hour, 47 minutes in long GOP or 29 minutes in intra mode, but only 10 minutes in the CDNG mode on a 128GB card. The real power of the camera, though, comes out when you record externally to a solid-state drive. In this case, we've hooked up to a 1TB Samsung T5 drive, like you see here, right up to the FPL's USB-C port. And this not only gives you the additional throughput necessary to record 12-bit CDNG video, but also the space necessary to store it. This footage is truly breathtaking to work with, especially in terms of color grading flexibility. You can make the slightest adjustments in almost every regard, much like you would expect from a raw still image. This is where 12-bit shines the most, as you can eke out the most from even high contrast shots. Bright sunny windows in an otherwise unlit room make for one of the most difficult things to shoot. Now, of course, in reality, you'd want to give this at least some kind of fill light, but let's see just how much we can recover from the highlights and the shadows. As you can see, the windows here are truly blown out, but we can recover just enough detail to start making out the scenery outside. What's truly impressive is how far we can push the shadows. Colors remain neutral in the shadows and well saturated, opening up the image entirely. By the way, a 1TB drive, which is what we used here, was estimated to provide about 56 minutes of raw recording time. So if you want to shoot raw, and I highly recommend it, be aware of the storage requirements. So naturally, we have to look at the new phase detect autofocus system. On outdoor real-world subjects, it finds those subjects pretty quickly and is generally accurate, but without a joystick, moving the AF point can be a little cumbersome. In cinema mode, I did find the AF to hunt from time to time, but it does work at all frame rates, and it's a huge improvement over the contrast detection of the original FP. With a maximum ISO of 25,600, as long as you don't have a pitch black environment, you should have plenty of room for low-light cinematography. The camera is actually impressively clean, even up to 25,600, which is still usable if you really need it. Personally, I'd feel safe up to 6,400 and then even 12,800 for darker shots that need it. Now, out of curiosity, I compared low-light performance in both compressed H.264 and 12-bit RAW modes to see if the camera handled anything differently. But I was particularly impressed with how well the H.264 compression retained the noise at ISO 25,600. The benefit to RAW here isn't so much that it offers better performance in low light, but if you happen to underexpose in RAW, like in this ISO 6400 shot, you can still boost it up a little bit and save some of the shadows. Plus, you have a little bit more detail to work with if you want to apply your own denoising. Lastly, as far as audio is concerned, the small size and cinema camera approach means you won't find XLR inputs here, though you do get a 3.5mm mic jack, and there is a built-in stereo mic useful for scratch audio. And that does work in RAW as well, by the way. So on the still side of things, the SigmafpL delivers gorgeous images. 61 megapixel photos are huge, and if you need high detail work such as in architecture or if you need to make really large prints, that resolution will really come in handy here. You can see here in the smallest fibers of the hat and the extreme detail in the goat's eye and fur here. Because of the headroom afforded by such a high resolution, the FPL can also offer a crop zoom function that actually works in both photo and video to punch in during capture. I found colors to be very natural, and they pop with a certain warmth, while dynamic range is able to handle the highlights and contrast of a bright, sunny day. Now, I found phase detect autofocus to be much more effective in stills mode and a real game changer over the FP's contrast detection, with much better responsiveness and accuracy. The face and eye detection modes also come in handy for portraiture, and AF locks on effortlessly. As expected though, it's the EVF that really changes the functionality of the FPL into a true stills camera, as the OLED screen provides a crystal clear view even in the sunniest of conditions. We'll take a closer look at that in a moment. Physically, the main takeaway with the FPL is that it shares the exact same dimensions as the original FP, right down to its 427-gram weight with a battery and card. It's important to keep in mind that this camera is intended to be rigged out as indicated by its multiple quarter-20 thread points, one on each side, fixed LCD screen, and small size. If you've already invested in a cage for the original FP, then you're probably set with the FPL. But the new EVF does raise the question of how they could work together. Now, you probably noticed it earlier, but to find out, I tried out with this small rig camera cage, which, as expected, fits perfectly around the SigmafpL. But the EVF takes up the entire left side. First, you have to pull back the USB-C cover, insert the module into both the USB-C and HDMI ports, along with two of the data pins in the middle, and then use the guide pin to help you position it correctly. The module locks into place with a rotating knob. Now, to my surprise, the EVF actually does work with this cage, but I do recommend you take a careful look at your existing FP cage in case it occupies any space on the left side. To switch between the EVF and LCD, there's a switch on the side. While the setup may seem a little awkward at first, in practice, I found the EVF very comfortable to use. The fact that it can tilt 90 degrees makes it incredibly effective at low-angle photography in particular. It's kind of like looking down at the viewfinder the way you would see in classic cinema. There's also some additional benefits such as headphone monitoring, which isn't normally available on the camera body. And best of all, the EVF also passes through the USB-C connection, maintaining the ability to externally record. There's also another 1/4-20 thread on the EVF to make up for the one it occupies on the body. As far as the camera itself is concerned though, the same rock-solid compact build is defined by an almost perfectly rectangular shape. That means there's little in the way of a camera grip though, and the backside does angle out slightly to rest your thumb. I did find this to be a little challenging for handheld video work. But as a cinema camera, it's somewhat expected that you'd either stabilize the camera with a tripod, shoulder rig, or gimbal. The button layout here is honestly one of my favorite parts though. The top side is clean with a single exposure dial recessed around the shutter button, which is also right next to the video record button. Next to that are the Cine to still mode switch and the power switch. These snap into position pretty securely, so they shouldn't switch modes easily even if your hand grazes them. The vent below that disperses camera heat, which then takes us to the backside. The same 3.15-inch LCD screen is clear and sharp, and I happen to find Sigma's menus here to be some of the easiest to follow and use. Oddly enough, the menus aren't touch capable despite the LCD being a touchscreen, but I usually prefer physical navigation anyway, so it wasn't a big deal for me. Moving over, the AE lock, quick set, and menu buttons are on the right side with the main navigation wheel and button between them. The quick set menu lets you avoid most of the full menu, which is nice, while also giving you the option to jump back into the full menu for each specific setting, so setting up the camera is a breeze. Below these buttons are the playback, frame guide, tone, color, and mode buttons, which provide immediate access to further customization. The front is solely dedicated to the lens mount, which is an L mount, meaning you can accept Sigma, Panasonic, and Leica L glass here, not to mention Sigma's own adapters to allow EF and PL lenses as well. The right side is largely reserved for one of the 1/4-20 threads and ventilation, while the left side is home to all of the camera's main connections. There's a USB-C connection used for external recording, battery charging, and new to the FPL, continuous power. Below that is a micro HDMI connection with additional pins above it utilized by the EVF and the 3.5mm mic jack. Lastly, on the bottom, there's the usual 1/4-20 tripod thread and the battery slot, which also houses the SDXC card. While I do love the latch design of the battery cover, the combination compartment could be an issue for some tripod designs when it comes to changing cards or batteries. The battery, by the way, is the same BP51 as the original FP. The Sigma FP concept in general has always been really fascinating to me. Both in the original model and here in the FPL, the design cleanly separates cinema and still features with an emphasis on buttons used to quickly access the most important settings, such as tone, color, and frame guide buttons on the bottom. Frankly, we don't usually see that on other cameras, so from a user experience perspective, they're really nice to have. On that note, the FPL brings with it 2 new color modes, duotone and powder blue, which like all the color modes can be applied to both stills and video. For an out-of-the-camera look, it's worth trying out, especially as you can dial in the amount of the look. One of my favorite features though is the director's viewfinder mode, which, believe it or not, actually simulates sensor dimensions and viewing angles from other camera manufacturers, letting you use the FPL as a compact viewfinder on set. Pair this with the EVF and it's a huge tool for directors on set who want to see what the camera sees. There's also some other new usability functions such as custom camera settings that can be stored as a QR code to be scanned by another camera, along with the ability to take a screenshot of the camera at the time of recording so you can duplicate those settings at a later date or use them across multiple cameras. Lastly, the FPL will be available on its own or in a kit with the EVF. The EVF will also be available separately if you wish to buy it at a later date or use it with the original FP. So that's it for the Sigma FPL. I'm Doug with B&H, and I'll see you next time.